The Pixel formula has barely changed since its inception back in October of 2016, and the way it goes is pretty simple. An average smartphone from the outside with some near flagship specs on the inside and class-leading software designed to show off all the best bits of Google's Android operating system. Over 4 generations of Pixel, the smartphone industry has evolved to make better use of hardware by developing and refining the software that it runs. And this has been all but led by Google ever since the launch of this, the original Pixel. I want to talk about the first in Google's flagship lineup to really evaluate its place in the market versus now with the Pixel 4 and what Google was really doing at that time and what it's doing now. The Pixel's design has aged pretty badly. It's too simple, too unrefined, and even back in 2016 it wasn't on the same level as the Galaxy S6, which was leading the design game at the time. And whilst the Pixel 4 has definitely improved on that and moved with the times, it's still pretty boring and rudimentary. I mean, it's good enough, but it's not exceptional. And that carries through to the rest of the hardware of the Pixel 4. It's got a Snapdragon 855 instead of the, at the time, up and current 855 Plus. Has 6GB of RAM instead of the 8 or even 12 that we see in other smartphones from that time, and sub 4000 mAh batteries when the rest of the industry was pushing that figure, if not exceeding it. But compare that to the OG Pixel and it's not the same story. Back in 2016, specs and features were everything. The latest Snapdragon 821 instead of the 820, 4GB of RAM when only really OnePlus would push that a little bit higher. Full HD and QHD AMOLED displays, the fastest charging in the game, and the original Pixel's spec sheet was, stout to say the least. In 2020, this phone really surprised me. It doesn't perform like you'd expect a 3-year-old phone to perform. It performs really well. In games, it was perfectly fine on this Quad HD display. It ran like a dream. The only time it really hiccuped was when running multiple applications at once, since it did show its age with only 4GB of RAM versus, 8, 12, or even 16 that we see in flagships in 2020. But as far as day-to-day usage goes and browsing social media apps, sharing things to Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, this really does hold up very well. And that's no coincidence. This phone, a 2016 release, has Android 10. How many phones do you know from that time that have Android 10? Some newer phones with 855 chipsets still haven't got Android 10, and this thing's had it for a while now. There's definitely been a recent change in direction to purely focus on software, AI and computational photography, versus a time where Google were really trying to balance both, perhaps really to see which would work before picking a lane. This is even more evident in last year's Pixel 3a. That phone was aimed at the mid-range sector with mid-range specs and mid-range pricing, but flagship software. Pixel Experience took an otherwise very boring phone to a level where some were comparing it to the iPhone XR, a far more expensive device. Want even more proof? Look at all the photos that come from any Pixel device. These phones do not have flagship camera hardware, but their camera systems are constantly being rated as some of the best in the entire industry. The Pixel 1 has been updated to keep a smaller gap between it and the latest and greatest as humanly possible. For a 3.5-year-old phone, this is a seriously impressive set of cameras when it comes to overall image quality. However, at the time, it was fairly normal to see one camera on the back of the smartphone. That's very different to the Pixel 4, which uses 2 cameras. Yes, that is a definite improvement, but that's still less than the average that you see on smartphones at around the time the Pixel 4 was launched. And that really all but confirms Google's focus on software, not really caring all too much about hardware in 2020 going forward. And that leads us on to the Pixel 5 launch going later this year. Now, based on the fact that Google's hardware has been less than fantastic as of recent, and based on the sheer amount of praise the Pixel 3a got, I wouldn't be surprised if the Pixel 5 was rocking less than flagship specs. And before that, we'd hopefully see the Pixel 4a, which is definitely going to be at least a mid-range smartphone, and a real change in direction from what this was. It would be interesting to put the two head to head to really see the differences between something that's more brawn versus something that's more brains in the Pixel 4a. bringing it back to the original Pixel, I think it was more of an experiment to see what Google could do and which way Google really wanted to go in terms of hardware versus software. As for this phone in 2020, I think it's really cool. I think it's still very usable by a lot of people, and it just shows how good a phone can be if you keep it updated and you keep it maintained. That's been it for this episode of Redux. I've really enjoyed making this video, so if you could, please do go and like this video. Comment letting us know your thoughts on what you think of the original Pixel, what you want to see from the Pixel 4a, from the Pixel 5, how they compare, that kind of thing. I would like to hear some proper analysis down in the comments. And whilst you're down there, might as well hit subscribe to never miss a video from us at Android Authority. I've been Ryan Thomas, and I'll see you later. Peace.